Welcome to ECE Biography, Sage Wisdom for Childcare Leaders. My name is Tony D'Agostino. I'm the founder and CEO of InspireCare 360. In this series of exclusive podcasts, we will meet with tenured and growing leaders in the childcare field, typically operating medium to very large childcare operations from tens of schools to thousands of schools. Our incentive is to learn what has been the path and traits that make outstanding leaders. Join us to glean the sage wisdom from these experienced individuals. Now, let's get started with ECE Biography, Sage Wisdom for Childcare Leaders.
Welcome to ECE CEO Biography, Sage Wisdom for Childcare Leaders. This is Tony D'Agostino, founder and CEO of InspireCare 360, and welcome to today's conversation. We have Anupam Martins today. Anupam Martins is the Chief Executive Officer and member of the Board of Directors for Excelligence Learning Corporation. So this is a little bit different. We aren't having a CEO of a childcare corporation, franchise, or network of schools as much as a provider who has multiple different type of organizations underneath their umbrella. So I think it'll be interesting because the influences for Anupam have some interesting parallels to other CEOs, yet some definitely diversions that he has had in his life. Before joining Excelligence, Anupam spent nearly 2 decades with Procter & Gamble, where he held a variety of regional and global leadership roles in marketing and general management across 5 countries in Asia, Europe, and North America, including serving as the CEO of an independent subsidiary in Vermont. Over his career, Anupam has led brand building, strategic planning, and P&L responsibilities across a diverse range of businesses, from startups to joint ventures to billion-dollar brands like Vicks or Pampers. So he has a significant, diverse background, especially in the area of leading and marketing. His experience spans new business development around and growth acceleration through different channels, from digital to omni to channel brand building in both developed markets. His corporate experience is as solid as it gets. You really have to hear this in this conversation, where he has found his motivation and the key people that he has had in his life help influence him in his direction. So I hope you get a flavor of that today. Anupam holds a BA in economics from St. Stephen's College in Delhi University, as well as postgraduate diplomas in management from the Indian Institute of Management. Outside of Excelligence, he remains actively involved in nonprofit K through 12 school education sectors in India, where he contributes in an honorary capacity. Excelligence, as you may or may not know, is a leading provider of educational products and solutions that empower educators to make childhood learning fun. So I want you to welcome Anupam Martins today for this excellent conversation. We look forward to it. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome, Anupam. How are you today?
Very well. And how are you doing, Tony?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. As I've mentioned in the past, we have mostly and mainly had CEOs of childcare schools, corporations, franchises, but in some unique situations like today, we've asked Anupam to join us to talk a little bit about his role and his rise and ascension with Excelligence and other companies before that. Our objective of this podcast is for the leaders out there, the budding leaders, to try to learn and glean what they can from other people's experiences. Sometimes those experiences are amazing. Sometimes there are some stories that are told that are like tales of what I could avoid too. So with that said, I was going to go ahead and get kicked off with something I sort of normally do, but just to ask you, in your very formative, in your very young years, did you happen to identify yourself potentially as a leader in any kind of early role, or see yourself where you would lead others?
Sure. So first, Tony, thank you for doing this, and really appreciate what you're doing for our ECE community and creating this platform wherein young leaders can access wisdom from others who have been in similar roles, and appreciate your considering Excelligence for this as well. Great question. So I'm not sure I thought of this as leadership then, and this is an incident when I was probably in fifth grade, but I had a love for reading, and my parents, who were both educators, encouraged that. So I had quite a few books at home, and I actually put that together and got a lot of other friends in the community together to create what we call the Children's Library, wherein we basically exchange books and get together. And we even organized a cultural program for the community. So it was fun to have, I guess, at that stage, and I can use the vocabulary now, but to have people working together, centered around learning and engagement.
Interesting. When you think about that, obviously it's a long time ago. I can barely remember 5 years of age. I do think I remember seeing myself in a mirror at 4 and having self-actualization at that moment for my life. But do you probably realize what was either motive or the joy that you received out of that activity?
So I think, yeah, I do, because it's something that excites me the most. I have a genuine curiosity and love for reading. And
Okay.
as you know, Tony, if you love reading, you love to talk to other people who've also read what you've read, or you can exchange ideas. So I think the ability to amplify that with people around me who've also engaged in that content was probably one aspect of the joy. But the other one was also just coming together and doing something for the community, whether it be some kind of a project or just even a cultural program that helps us expose, I guess, at that time, our talents to the community we are around.
Okay, interesting. And since you bring up reading so early in this conversation, throughout your career, maybe more of your adult career, was there any books that you read that gave you sort of, I would say, some of those aha moments? You're like, oh, wait, this is sort of a transformative book that has really helped me think different about things. I'm sure there's possibly even more than one, but what comes to mind when I bring that up?
Yeah, so there's certainly more than one. And in fact, there are probably 10. But if I just have to take one, I would say Stephen Covey's Seven Habits of Highly Effective People was a very early on book, and frankly, even a training that I got onto that I think has really transformed my life in terms of how I think of getting organized around principles that drive effectiveness, service, community, principles of leadership. So I'm very, very grateful to Stephen Covey for everything he's done to put that together. And then there's another one called Speed of Trust, which is also just great from a leadership standpoint in terms of how do you engender trust, which is probably the biggest currency for leaders in any organization, and what are the principles to do that. And I had the privilege and the opportunity to actually become a trainer for both of those
Oh, wow.
is that the Franklin Covey Foundation used to run kind of early on in my career. And I just think when you train, like all our teachers, you learn twice. So I have really enjoyed and benefited from that construct all through my career.
Interesting. When you talk about the book Speed of Trust, it's on my list to still read. I haven't had a chance, but I will say, Anupam, that one of the things I so often preach to my staff, to my teams, to the families that I have, even with my childcare schools, is that when it comes right down to it, one of the biggest competencies that you can own is the opportunity to build trust with others. When you look at building trust with others, what tends to be your key philosophies in building trust?
So that's a great question. So I'm going to first give you the framework answer and then my personal answer, because it's good.
Sure, yeah.
The framework answer is trust is a function of character and competence. So you need to have both the integrity in your character in terms of your commitment to the purpose, and then competence in doing what you're committed on to do. What I translate that into and what I do in terms of building trust is really clarity and alignment around purpose, and making sure I'm being very transparent and as clear as possible in communicating that. And then after that, it's just kind of regular communication so that there are no surprises. So my philosophy on building trust is no surprises, not even good ones. It's essentially, you want to make sure that people, what you see is what you get. You're always communicating with authenticity and transparency, and being able to just share things as they are.
So you really are, what I hear out of that is very clear about setting expectations, very clear, concise expectations and follow through. Because without that, you probably have very little character as to your competency if you're not meeting your expectations.
Exactly, exactly. And I think the underlying principle behind that, Tony, is leadership comes, to me at least, from a place of stewardship, right? So we are very blessed to be in positions of leadership, but that's because we have been entrusted with organizations, with resources, with things that our customers expect us to do, which is very important to the future of the world. Right? In our case, early childhood education, I can scarcely think of anything more important than impacting early minds. And we have that stewardship responsibility to make sure we are maximizing those resources for the optimal benefit of all of the various stakeholders we have. So definitely our customers, but also our employees, our communities, and in our case, our educators, regulators, and everybody else we serve. So if you don't have that foundation of stewardship and integrity, it's difficult to build trust in what you're doing.
Yeah. And if you think about it through the years, as you were likely, like many of us, we started as individual contributors in some organization and eventually rose into management and then leadership roles. What has become the approach around trust of sort of embedding that in your teams? So your teams had a clear understanding about why trust is so important, the art of building trust through competency, through character, like you mentioned. And, so obviously you probably do a lot of it just from exhibiting it yourself. But is there anything you formally do when you are having conversations with your direct leadership team or those other team members that you work with?
So I think communication around routines and being very clear and having transparency of how the business is doing is clearly one practice. So we start uh, having a very disciplined series of kind of routines and meetings that make sure that people understand what the business is, transparency around data, just making sure that all of the information that the organizational leaders need to make decisions is available across the business systems that we are on. But beyond that, it comes from just consistently doing what you say. So I'm going to give you one small example. An area that I'm really passionate about is building great workplaces. So we have now for 4 years running across 5 states that we operate in being recognized as a great place to work, right? And that's something that's important to me because that reassures me that we are unleashing our team's fullest potential in service of our mission. But the way we do that is we do an organization-wide survey, and we transparently share the results of that survey with all of our leadership and ask them to make specific action plans in terms of what it takes to address that. And the reason I'm sharing this is because this may be relevant to a lot of our EC leaders,
Yeah.
right? So, and based on, again, what were our areas of strength that we need to build on? What are our areas of opportunity that we need to develop? And then we don't leave that at that level. We then go back to the teams that filled up the survey, and the business leader or the function leader and I typically then literally go back to them. Here is our thinking on our action plan on what you said. Again, my HR leader and I read every single verbatim of that feedback. And then we check for, is this what you said, or is there anything else you want us to do? Tony, as I work this through every organization, I typically get more than 100 different ideas of what our teams really want implemented, and then we capture
Wow.
them and then we implement them. What that does is it just creates a higher baseline for next year in terms of
Yeah.
what you need to do, but it builds incredible trust because most often what our teams want more than anything else is to confirm that their leadership is aware and listening and responsive to what they need to succeed in their roles.
Yeah, no, I think that's excellent. And I think the important elements that you were talking about is the responsiveness of getting back to the teams, because what I've seen before, whether I was a contributor who was surveyed or I was the leader, and maybe I made the faux pas of not getting back with them, is they will lose trust quicker for
Right.
you if you do a survey and then you don't share any of the results or the actions you're going to take from it.
Absolutely.
So,
And what that does is it then reduces the incentive of them giving their time again the next time you ask that survey. So one of the metrics that I measure is not just what scores we got in terms of total engagement, but also what percentage of the organization participated. And I want that to increase every year as well, because that reassures me that all of our team believes that we take this seriously, right? That we have
yeah.
action is going to come out of it.
Well, and you've mentioned measurement a couple times, so you could tell I like to pull at threads, and I will unwind your sweater eventually. But
Love, love.
I think it was Peter Drucker or maybe Edward Deming who said, that what cannot be measured cannot be managed.
What gets measured gets managed. Yes.
Yes. So that's the reverse of it, right? That what is measured, can be managed and what have you. Tell me a little bit more about your philosophy or your thought process around measuring and putting in standards of measuring against expectations of building trust. So I know, and I have to give a little commentary on it a little bit too, is I love to tell to my team, people love to be empowered, yet they do not often like accountability. So part of my philosophy is, hey, listen, there's great empowerment opportunities with this, but you also have to be accountable to what you're empowered for. Tell me a little bit about your philosophies there.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, Tony, the number of times I've said measured, I'm quite data driven and quite metrics driven. And one of my philosophies from a work standpoint is to create an intellectual meritocracy where data wins over opinion. So you need to make sure that you have that accurate data that can trounce opinions, because otherwise it's kind of the higher paid opinion winning in arguments, right? And that's not a fun place to have people grow their careers. But then it's about having clarity on what those metrics are. So obviously, as part of our stewardship role, we have some basic metrics that we need to deliver on in terms of top line and bottom line that helps us continue to pay the bills, continue to grow the organization. But then there are lots of others. And for me, net promoter score, for example, in terms of where we measure our customers' satisfaction from us, benchmark versus our competition, is a very important metric. Again, we get these surveys on a weekly basis. We consolidate, review the data on a monthly basis. And every single feedback or comment that we receive from our customers is something that we take very seriously. The entire team has visibility to it. I get that typically over the weekend, and by Monday, my teams are already responding in terms of what specific feedback our customers have given, because being responsive to the needs of your stakeholders, particularly customers, is one of the primary reasons we are in business. So measuring, so that's an important metric. I also look at from a business standpoint, since we sell products that a lot of our early childhood educators as well as elementary educators buy, their feedback that we receive in terms of ratings and reviews, as well as any feedback we receive on quality, is something we take extremely seriously. So the reason that's important is because my organization knows that those are metrics that our leadership is reviewing. It just drives a lot of clarity of purpose and urgency around making sure that those metrics are the best that they can be, and that we're not only just driving for top line and bottom line, but really making sure that our customers love the experience they're having with our products, that we're taking our quality very seriously, well beyond kind of industry and regulation benchmarks, because what we do is so important to our future, to our children.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think it's awesome of, the degree of engagement that you have at your level to your team to ensure to see it through, because quite oftentimes it's, I've seen a lot of it being just delegated, but not really driven at the upper levels sometimes.
Yeah, and at the risk of repeating myself, to me, the organizational survey metric on both number of participation as well as engagement rates, and then the by breakdown across people, culture, all of those metrics, that's another super important metric that I hold myself accountable for. And the simple way I do this is, again, going back to Stephen Covey, we have this construct that we call 5 priorities, which is basically 5 important things that you align on as a company. And again, I'm sharing this because this is probably also relevant to early childhood leaders. I think the first of those 5 priorities is a core business metric. So it's top line, bottom line, whatever those core business metrics are across segments. The second, third, and fourth priority for each individual contributor or each business leader is their core functional metrics. So it would be products for merchandising, it would be sales and those activity metrics for sales, marketing metrics for marketing. So those are the 3 functional metrics that everybody builds onto. And then the last one is an organizational metric. So for me, it would be the continuation of the Great Places recognition or the work we put in to drive high engagement workplaces. But also for each individual contributor, it's a commitment that they make to their own personal development as to what are they going to learn on in this year. And we capture that as a metric that we track. So we do this annually and review it as often as needed. But everybody should have one, an overall linkage to the company's business metric, three, functional specific metrics, and then last, an individual personal development growth priority. And the idea is that's kind of your contract with the company. That's what clarifies what you are doing, what your function is doing, what your business is doing. And I start by creating mine first at the start of the year, cascade that to my leadership team. They then work that in terms of what each function is going to do to deliver the overall metrics, because I align mine with the boards. And that's how everybody in the company basically is singing off the same sheet, so to say, in terms of having that consistency of metrics and accountability that is important to deliver the results. Again, because what we do is really important for our children.
Yeah, no, and that's fantastic. And thank you for the detailed answer on that. Before I want to go in a different direction, I do want to ask you one more question about this. And it's something I think a lot of, aspiring leaders run into. And that is they find that they have some very talented people in their organizations. And this happens a lot actually in the childcare business. Yet that person doesn't align with the kind of metrics that you're trying to achieve. So, quite oftentimes in the childcare industry, there's a lot of hiring within. It's tough because a lot of people come into this industry and it's a waypoint for them for a different career. So you're always trying to attract the greatest talent to stay with you in this industry. When you run into something of that nature, where you're like, now here's a talented person, but man, they just miss the metrics. They miss the metrics. And sometimes you still need to manage by the metrics, as we say, right? What is your philosophy or thought process when you see talent within someone, but it's not aligning with metrics?
Yes, I think that's a great question. First, I have the deepest respect for everybody in our industry because, again, I came from a family of educators. My wife's a teacher, and I completely understand that not everybody is equally driven by the same metrics. So I think it starts by making sure that the metrics don't start by something that's top down, but sometimes something that they come up with themselves. So I come up with mine, and then each of my team members comes up with theirs. And it's important that they own and drive that metric because it is important to them to accomplish what they think is their contribution to our business. Right. Sure. So it starts from there. It makes, and again, it all needs to go back to that purpose. So maybe I should have started with this, but the purpose of Excelligence is to empower educators to make childhood learning fun. Right. That's what we do. So everything then needs to go back to that overarching purpose about what we are doing, whether it be somebody in new product development working with teachers to come up with great new products, or somebody in merchandising making sure that they are at the right price, at the right quality, at the right assorted the right way. So those are kind of specific sub metrics that come from that overall goal. So if there is buy-in at the earlier stage and is something that they have created, it becomes a bit easier to hold people accountable to them.
Interesting.
But if it isn't, then it's a question of whether this is a will issue or a skill issue, right? Yeah. Skill issues are easier to navigate. Will issues are harder to navigate, right? So that's kind of where then the conversation goes, which is, okay, can I enable you? Can I empower you? Is it training? Is it some help that you need to be able to problem solve to help you get to the goal that we need to get to? Or do you not think it's important, in which case we need to have that discussion of why have you put it in the first place, or anything else that's preventing? My personal experience, Tony, has been that my organizational challenges have been less about people not wanting to deliver on the metrics, but not understanding how to do that. And that's where just helping on the how really helps, and having those informal coaches, mentors, those additional training opportunities that you can provide. We invest in a very significant learning management system to make sure that our teams can get the skills they need when they need it. Those would be kind of imperatives to think about.
That's fantastic, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate the learning management part because that's something that we do. So yes, we agree with that fully. But I think it is great the way you mentioned about getting person aligned to those metrics, because oftentimes they may not even understand how to get there themselves, and helping coach them and mentor them. And that sort of gets into my next question that's going away from this is, you mentioned about your two parents who are educators when you were young, and what an influence they had on you. In addition to them, or maybe we can focus on them too, who were influencers in your more formative years that really helped influence who you've become?
So by far and out, the most formative ones were my parents, particularly because of who they were and what they did. So just very briefly, my father was, they were both teachers. They were both actually college teachers. And my father left his college teaching job to start a school, an elementary school, which essentially
Wow.
in the Indian context admits children at age 3, because he believed you could only make a difference to kids when they were that young. So my younger sister, who's 6 years younger than me, she was the first student of that school. So
Oh, wow.
that school started when she turned 3, and she graduated from there. So but seeing him build an institution from scratch, and the tenacity and the perseverance and the discipline that that takes, combined with the integrity and the high values that he exhibited while doing that, was a huge inspiration. And to complement him, my mother, who continued to be a college teacher, because again, when somebody's starting an institution, somebody needs to pay the bills as well. So she continued teaching in the college, but she really supported him through it. And she brought a very different aspect. So there was all of they were both great teachers. So I grew up with a lot of their students all around us at home. A teacher's house is always like an open house. So just seeing the impact that they were making because of just the quality and the love that they brought to their profession just reinforced in me the importance of whatever you do, you need to do it with quality and love, right? So that was they were great educators. My mother was also literature in her own right. She wrote poetry. She wrote articles, but she also
Wow.
had this incredible way of communication that built on compassion. And one of her favorite constructs was, you can have a difference of opinion, but you should never have a difference in your hearts. And just
Wow.
make sure that you're always communicating with sensitivity. So she was a social activist. She worked for women's rights issues in the small town that I grew in. And so she had a really wide gamut of social activism, education, supporting the school. So growing up in that environment, and they were both avid readers as well. So just kind of imbibing that was just a blessed childhood that I just cannot say enough of. But then, because of them being educators, we always had lots of teachers. But I also coming to our home. But I also had some great teachers that I learned from, that was a great positive influence. I had a Catholic priest who was a family friend whom I learned a lot from. My grandparents used to live with us. I just learned a ton. So I feel very blessed and fortunate to have had that upbringing wherein we had so many different incredible role models to learn from.
Wonderful. And you talk about the role models, the Catholic priests, some other teachers. Is there a teacher, maybe it is the priest, who stood out to you and what they really embedded in you that has helped you develop to who you are today?
So yes, there is one, and I share this because I think I mentioned to you that my father started the school, so I still talk
Yeah.
that to our teachers. There was a elementary school teacher. I'm talking grade 5, in a more conventional kind of chalk and duster kind of environment that education was at that time and still is in many places. And she was teaching photosynthesis, and she actually got in our classroom in grade 5, and it's the first time we'd seen it, at the entire setup with a beaker, a test tube, hydra, and literally showed us how oxygen came into that test tube, and did that experiment just outside the corridor in the classroom. And that piqued curiosity towards science for me that frankly just has just stayed for a very long time. I ended up pursuing science in high school, and just had genuine interest in that because of that demonstration that went beyond just the classroom teaching aspect of it. So whenever I saw teachers go out of their way to do that, that's the memory that comes to me.
Wow. It is amazing sometimes when you look back at that, and it can't help but smile too, because you look at the level of influence that they probably didn't even realize that they had on you. All these years later, they're being mentioned in a podcast, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it is awesome. So moving forward a little bit in your career, what was you would say was your first leadership role? And I sometimes differentiate that from management role because obviously there's a difference between leading and managing. But maybe when did you identify in some level of management that you really needed to inspire people? And that's where I would start to go towards leadership.
So I think the first leadership role, the way I think about it, is when you start leading people, right? So when you move from the individual contributor part of your assigned tasks to actually start leading people. And that for me happened a little over 20 some years ago when I started managing a team of people. And it was a very interesting approach because I had interpreted, Tony, the golden rule to mean treat other people as you would like to be treated. And my first experience, and this was I was managing a team of people in the Philippines, which is not where I grew up. So it was slightly different culture, obviously, from where I grew up in India. And my genuine approach had been, hey, everybody is ambitious and everybody wants to get on the fast track to promotions and so on. So I said, okay, here is what I'm going to do, and here's how I'm going to help you get onto that fast track to promotion if you work as per this. And the first direct report I talked to, and I'm still in touch with them. I'm a godfather to their
Oh,
kid.
wow.
Was they shared with me that they didn't necessarily want that, and they'd rather I just be available to them, chat with them, ask them how their weekend went, and invest more in the relationship side because career ambition wasn't the most important thing to them at that stage. So that was an important leadership experience because that changed my definition of the golden rule to treat others as they would like to be treated, not as you would like to be treated. And that I
Right.
think is just is a leadership lesson I've carried on since my amazing time in the Philippines.
Wow. Interesting. And, you know, I think it's sort of profound, right? Is changing the standard golden rule about, treat others not as how you would want to be treated, but actually understanding how do they want to be treated,
Yeah.
which is very prolific, honestly, in a way. Uh, when when I look at that and I look at you ascending, there had to be times where you made some missteps. Okay. Is there anything that resonates with you that was a learning that you went through that maybe you're like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I might not have gotten that one wrong, but I'll tell you, I certainly learned from that.
Oh no, I got some things really wrong, and I'm happy to share about them as well. Just because again, my objective is to make sure I can
Sure.
your listeners learn from those. So as you grow in leadership, I think more and more of what you do is resource allocation, right? And you're managing resources to multiple priorities and multiple stakeholders across your customers, across your employees, across your shareholders, across your investors, across your in terms of the important things for your community, for your regulators, and so on. And my single biggest leadership misstep that I learned from was if I prioritize one at the expense of the others. And it's
Mm,
balancing them. So I'm going to give you a tangible experience. I'd taken over a business in one of my first CEO roles that was fairly challenged from a business standpoint, and we had to make cuts. And it was recommended to me, and I agreed to it, that we should cut our employee engagement activity budget. So one of the
mm,
things we decided to make a cut there, and honestly, that cost me so much more in morale that I needed to rebuild versus the few hundreds of dollars I took away from employee events. That I learned that regardless of however tough a situation you're going in through, you never cut employee engagement. There's genuine magic in how people bond together over shared activities, over food. You never take that away. Never take that away. And culture and consistency of culture is even more important when you're navigating a challenging situation or a turnaround than when things are really good. So that was my biggest lesson. Never prioritize in that case the needs of say the business return over what was needed for employees.
And what did it take you to do to recover from that?
Put together exactly what I shared in terms of codifying my philosophy of being people centered through this great places process. So we started by understanding, did a baseline survey transparently and not unexpectedly, did not receive the recognition in the first year, but
Yeah,
got a list of things to work on and plowed through that list so that the next time we went, we actually got the recognition. And this was recognized as the best place to work in that state as well.
that's fantastic. That's awesome. And it's a nice feather in the cap, as they say, the cliche goes. So when you look at your role today, what is your favorite part of what you do?
So my favorite part of what I do is going out to our customers and seeing them in action with children. And it's the most beautiful moment is when you go into an early childhood center or classroom and with a center director or a teacher, and a child just comes and unexplicably hugs you, right? So because that's what our teachers experience the whole time, right? So that is probably the most beautiful part of what I enjoy personally. In terms of what I like about my job, it's about the impact we're able to make in terms of serving educators. Education, as you know very well, Tony, has changed so much even in the last 5 years after COVID, when we're navigating a different challenge every year, and being able to be at the forefront of working with a team of extremely talented and committed individuals to serve to serve all of our teachers with new and different products that meet all of the challenges that they are dealing with, whether it be behavioral challenges with children, whether it be calming needs, whether it be addressing achievement gaps, and just coming up with those solutions that can help them become better at what they do because of what we enable them with. That's deeply personally meaningful to me.
Yeah, well, that's great. And I do appreciate your first one for sure, because with my childcare centers, one of my biggest pleasures, I almost have to say it, if I'm having a bad day almost, I like to go there. I walk through the classrooms and I'm getting hugs, I'm getting high fives, and I'm
Exactly.
like, you know what? I've reminded myself of my why, right?
Exactly.
I've reminded myself of my why. And I think as leaders, we have to do that often, because we're all just people and sometimes things just don't work out perfectly some days. So it's great to be able to take advantage of that. When you look at your teammates and your staff, obviously to be successful as you have been, you have to hire talent. And to hire talent, you're looking for traits, I would assume, that cross the different operational roles that they play. From anywhere from, like you said, marketing to HR to operations to logistics, sourcing, all those different things that you do, distribution, sales. What are some of the traits that are really important to you when you are recruiting and hiring, which I think is, for me, one of my most important jobs as a CEO?
Sure, great. That's a great question again. So I'd start by assessing fit with our mission and what we're trying to do, and some kind of a genuine interest in our space, right? So just because of how unique education is, and I'm sure every field feels the same way. I've worked in other fields that may claim the same, but there has to be some genuine interest in our mission, right? In this thing of
Yeah.
empowering educators to make childhood learning fun. So that's a baseline check. Beyond that, I look for, I would say, four different areas to just get comfort on. Do they have leadership experience, right? So when I say leadership, can they envision, can they energize, can they enable, can they empower and execute, right? So can they get things done, right? So that's and I just ask kind of, what are you most proud of, just as a heuristic to understand what they've accomplished and what they're proud of. We are in a tough business in some cases, so I look for some evidence of problem solving as a skill, because I think if there's anything we've learned is we'll have different, new and different challenges and problems to solve. So how do we make sure that that there's an understanding of problem solving? I also look for people who have evidence of teamwork, because we are a team sport, right? So Excelligence is a team sport.
Yeah.
But if you're just an individual contributor and don't like working with teams, you can be really successful elsewhere, but probably not with us. And the
Right.
last but not least is agility, right? So which is your ability to pivot. And because if there's anything we've done in the last several years, we've basically pivoted from one need to another of educators, and people who just don't like change at all, but probably also not thrive in the environment we operate in. So that combination of, again, purpose alignment, leadership, problem solving, agility, and teamwork is probably what I look for when I'm looking for to recruit people to the team.
Well, and I appreciate that, because I know that a lot of the people who are out there who listen to these, they're always, looking at the quality of the talent they're trying to bring on board, to motivate them, to inspire them, to energize themselves too. But looking at what the traits are super important. I like to hone in a little bit on the agility side. When we look behind you, we have one larger corporation with five pillars of entities that hold it up. As you continue to grow, my assumption is, because I've been in small corporations, my own private businesses before. I've worked for Ernst and Young, been with, Xerox Corporation. The larger they get, agility sort of gets lost sometimes in the mix, the bigger you become. How do you fulfill the ability for Excelligence to have agility in what they hear from its customers, what you hear from your staff, what you hear from what you think you need to react to the marketplace? Because as you start to become larger, I would assume it becomes a little more difficult.
Yeah. So I've worked in significantly larger businesses in the past where that was definitely true, Tony. And one of the things I love about Excelligence is what I call our effort to impact ratio, right? So we are large enough to have significant impact without needing a lot of effort from a process and a bureaucracy standpoint. And that's what we really try to make sure. So I think the fundamental question on agility, Tony, goes back to being responsive to customer needs, right? So we are not agile and we don't want to change for change's sake, but we want to change because we are making a fundamental difference to what our customers are asking us for. So it comes back to how close you are to that feedback from your customers. So that's why I was talking about net promoter scores or being in the market, visiting customers, listening to what their needs are, listening to our teacher developers, what they are hearing and seeing in the marketplace, and then making sure that you're bringing that data from a process standpoint back to your leadership and saying, okay, given what we are hearing right now, what do we need to do to change? I'll give you an example of just navigating COVID, right? So as you know, it happened during March, wherein we had a lot of our products on a ship on its way to us, and then schools shut down. And for the next few months, there was a need to transform what we had in our warehouse to at-home supplies. Then as schools started opening, it was no share supplies. And then as schools reopened at more scale, it was okay, back to the gallon units of paint and larger paper and so on and so forth in terms of what we provided to the schools. But being close to the customer feedback and communicating that almost instantaneously to your teams helps everybody understand what they need to do, because no one person can run a company of this scale, right? So it's not about it's about leveraging the collective intelligence of everybody looking at the same customer landscape and then making the changes they need to in each of their functional areas to collectively come together to a solution that helps keep us at the forefront of what our customers need.
Interesting. As you discuss those different elements of it, it it started to percolate in my mind a little bit of the uniqueness of a few of the different brands you have behind you are product driven. They're not all, like Frog Sheep is a software driven company, but the fact that they're product driven, outside of the politics, how will tariffs affect you, but also the childcare space to a degree, if you don't mind me asking? Because I
Yeah.
know that's got to be top of mind for some of the things that are made domestically, but other things get imported, and they always have been.
So without getting political, I think we will know better once we know for sure what the tariff landscape is, because as you can imagine, it's been evolving, right? So, but I think in almost all cases, what I see across is everybody is making as much of an effort as they can to keep cost increases to the bare minimum, right? Because we want to make sure we are supporting our customers through what's already a pretty challenging external landscape. But at some stage, it just becomes too hard to do that. And that's where you'd be looking at different alternatives in terms of, are there products that we can source elsewhere? Are there products that we are fortunate to have Children's Factory as one of our vertically integrated soft play manufacture solutions. So is there more manufacturing capability we can bring? We also manufacture some of our own colorations products. So bringing more products in-house has been something that our team has been, again, in the spirit of agility, pivoting to, because depending on the tariff landscape, there'll be different solutions that help us minimize the impact to our customers. What we are really committed to, Tony, is making sure that we make no compromises on quality, because again, what
Yeah.
we do is very important, but also minimize any cost impact to our customers. That's how I see us solving this in the medium term. But we'll just need a lot more clarity on what the going state is, because you can then solve for that to make sure that
Yeah.
we make the most optimal solution.
Well, and it's tough when it's a moving target, right? Because, planning for a moving target has never been easy. Ask anybody in the military. But with that said, when you look at it, I was also thinking, different CEOs and leaders I've had on before were able to give data points on the childcare industry based on enrollments, based on churn, when it comes to families coming and going, slowing and increasing. You have a different perspective, right? You're watching not only child cares, but also probably public schools, charter schools, other entities who acquire from you. What do the data points that you see sort of indicate where we are, as well as where we might be going in more often in the childcare industry, but in the overall education industry, where do you see those data points lining up and saying, What's going on? Is there expansion? Is there contraction? Is there a flat level right now?
So I think I take it at two levels. I take it kind of short to medium term and then long term, just because the two are a bit different. I think the short to medium term outlook is honestly a bit turbulent because there are just lots of unknowns in terms of how some of the immigration policies impact enrollments, particularly in the early childhood space. I've met some of our customers who were talking about enrollment impacts even in infant and toddler classrooms, which is slightly more unexpected than, for example, pre-K classrooms, where in particular in the
Right.
segment there's a move to UPK and so on and so forth. In K5, there's generally a trend wherein public sector and public school enrollment has generally been on declining to not growing as much because of the move to more choice-based platforms, whether it be charter schools, private schools, or even homeschooling, which is growing quite substantially as a trend. So in the medium term, there's going to be some of this churn as more school choice increases, as the population growth and the impact of the immigration policy settle down. But here's what my favorite story on childcare and why I'm such a huge believer in this space is. If I look at, again, going back to the story of where my parents started the school, in India, at three, you pretty much at age three, you pretty much enter school, right? It's 3 years of kindergarten and then you get to first grade. The number of children in structured childcare at between ages 3 to 5 in the US, depending on which survey you go for, is between 40 to 60%, even after the recent increases of universal pre-K. That number for for the OECD countries, which is our kind of comparable benchmark, is more than 90%. Why is
Wow.
that? Because everybody understands that as we share in our Frog Street kind of curriculum work with with our customers, that 80% of a child's brain develops by age 3 and 90% by age 5. So the impact you can make to child development by having that early intervention between age 3 and 5, which is fortunately a bipartisan priority that is literally across the aisle, and therefore there is more UPK expansions going. That is going to make a significant increase of the number of children. Say if I just take total broad numbers about the 43 to 45 million children among 0 to 12 today, about 32 of them are in structured childcare, because there's this huge area of 0 to 5 that is not covered, and more of those kids will have the opportunity to experience childcare and education at a time where it makes the biggest difference to their development. That's where I think the long-term outlook for our space is only going to be super positive and growing.
Right. Interesting. And do you think that when it comes to the opportunity for growth in this area, what do you mentioned UPK a number of times. What do you think that's going to do of having an impact on the childcare industry? Because we're actually, addressing it here in New York State. New York State has UPK, Florida has, VPK. There's a different number of programs, and it seems like there is a desire for the states through the Department of Education to get into the childcare business more and more. Do you have a bigger flavor on how you see that will affect the independent providers in the marketplace?
So I think this is where it gets a bit more nuanced and it gets state by state, given the
Right.
nature of education in our country, right? So there are some states that believe in building capacity in the public segment by having elementary schools add pre-K classrooms. And in those states, I think some of the private providers are seeing a little bit of a shift of enrollment, particularly at the pre-K levels, to the public segment. There are many other states that are actually choosing a very different route of actually creating voucher type programs to pay for capacity in the private segment, or models of public private partnership. A lot of Head Starts, for example, also have capacity in the private segment as well. So I think depending on state by state, there'll be a slightly different outlook of choices that each state will make in terms of how to expand UPK. And that's also what I know a lot of our customers are planning in terms of expansion, in terms of which states do they see more capacity coming online because of the state paying parents to choose which private provider they'd like to get their UPK education from.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. When you do look at again, sort of the marketplace, and we look at leaders now, because part of what I'm focusing on is the people in our audience, right? And they are trying to look at the dynamics of the things that you've mentioned. Short-term things are unsettled. We see that a lot with childcare right now. We're not sure where the UPK is going completely. Different states have different policies, and a lot of them haven't even been fully defined.
Right.
So when you do look at, and you were to give any advice to aspiring leaders, someone who might have 1 to 5 schools, someone who is trying to make a bit of an impact, foundationally, and it doesn't have to be about the economy as much or tariffs or any of those things. Foundationally, if you're to give some guidance and support to them, what would you say would be important for them, especially around the area of the leadership side? But then I want to ask you something where I think you have a good perspective, and that is sort of the procurement side of things too.
Sure. I think that probably start at a probably more of a 30,000-foot level of making sure you're very clear on what your core value proposition is and how is that better than other alternatives that your customers are evaluating, right? So, and that's why this will vary state by state, and making sure that you understand in the context of which you're operating, what's your combination of the core functional product that you're delivering, which is again the environment and everything else. How does that intersect with the perception or the brand equity that you're creating through marketing, through other channels, through the experiences parents have when they walk into your door, and how does that compare to the price that you're charging for that service? Because that's where a lot of the differentiation happens in terms of just defining the value proposition. So going back to just understanding the fundamentals of that. Beyond that, I would say, just from a leadership standpoint, surrounding yourself with people who are committed to your mission and see the world the way you do in terms of your vision, in terms of which philosophy you align to, because there are many options to choose from in early childhood education, and make sure that you're being very consistent with that to deliver that value proposition at scale and more consistently, because there are niches and you could be successful in any niche if you just choose and execute that consistently, right? And I see a lot of our customers saying, we are specializing in this space and we believe that this kind of a parent is our target audience, and then that influences which cities and states they expand into, right, as a traffic choice. So the clearer you are on the value proposition, the more then you can use data and analytics to identify what should be your chosen growth path to maximize your chances of finding those customers who find value in your proposition, and segment the market accordingly. Your growth will be governed by the pace at which you can attract people who are similarly motivated. And then it's about just putting in the processes, right? Putting in the processes to do what you do, which is to keep learning, making sure that I love this construct called the half-life of knowledge, right? So we live in a world wherein the things that we hold true are no longer true in some periods of time. The ability to leverage technology and AI to do what you can at scale and more efficiently and more effectively. But perhaps also, just given how demanding this profession can be, investing in self-care, right? And making sure that you have your own personal renewal routine. Again, going back to Stephen Covey and borrowing from his concept of sharpening the saw across mind, body, heart, and soul, right? Doing something for each of those 4 aspects pretty much every day to make sure that you can give with a cup that's overflowing, right? So that's just a very important construct. When it comes to products and procurement, I just think our customers have a ton of choice. Just making sure that you are looking at quality, and then vendors who have that commitment to quality, because we also operate in an environment wherein there are lots of products that are being sold that don't necessarily have even the compliance testing that is needed to meet early childhood standards. That's something that we take very seriously. So just making sure that you have a trusted vendor supplier network of people who can implement your vision. We talk about, one of the philosophies in early childhood talks about environment being the third teacher, right? So creating that environment in your center that resonates with your values, but leveraging the expertise that vendor partners can bring to be able to deliver that third teacher in a way that's consistent, scalable, and cost competitive for you is probably a good place to go.
Very, very interesting. And I appreciate the guidance, on, procurement and what have you, because a lot of people, oftentimes are doing it very price-based. In a tough economy, it's hard not to. You start looking for the lowest price. But as we all know too, there's a lot of value when you look at why people are acquiring things is really at the end of the day, it's value that you get. And value doesn't always align with price.
Exactly.
So, given that, I do want to go back to your mind, body, heart, and soul. What do you do for yourself for that area?
So great question. So I think let's start with body, right? And so how do you keep yourself? Let's take a step back. As leaders, one of the most important things you're bringing to any interaction is positive energy, right? You need to make sure you're putting yourself in the path of being able to get more and more positive energy to each interaction, because that's what leadership is about. We are in the energy business, right? As leaders, so that requires a whole mind, body, heart, and soul behind it to be able to consistently bring that positive energy. So starting with the body, right? Some of the younger people in your audience may not appreciate this, but it's very difficult to bring your best without 7 to 9 hours of sleep every day. And I say 7 to 9 because there's a lot of research that you cannot do with anything less than that. So
Yeah.
finding ways to get that with everything else that you're doing. Nutrition, right? There's a lot of research that again is available to support that. In general, whole food, non-processed, more plant-based and animal-based diets are generally good for you. But again, being disciplined about that nutrition. Exercise, right? There's a entire body of research that you can't just do one, but you need a combination of aerobic strength training, or muscle building, flexibility, and endurance to be able to make sure that you do that again. And for me, it's about just finding that 30 minutes a day to do one of those four options pretty much on a daily basis. So that's kind of the foundation from a body. Mind, this is where it gets really interesting, right? We all talk about a paucity of time. And if we then look at the weekly screen time data we get from our devices, it tells us the incredible amount of time we're spending on our devices. The reason that's important is because just as food is nourishment for the body, what we consume is nourishment for our mind. So making sure you're being really intentional about, again, just because the output is positive energy, creating, absorbing positive information, and really avoiding doom scrolling, avoiding a lot of time on social media that's not relevant to what you need to achieve your goals. So just being very diligent about the information you consume, not consuming, frankly, too much of irrelevant information. And then putting yourself in the path of good ideas for folks who are like you, who create this podcast. There's just a ton of great, good content you can absorb, which will help nourish and keep you sharp. And then coming back to the half-life of knowledge, putting yourself in the path of technology, leveraging AI, just learning new things, and keeping your mind sharp. Heart. The heart is about relationships. What do you do both at work and outside of work to invest in relationships that frankly give you the most joy, right? Ultimately, I enjoy a lot of my work because I enjoy the people I work with. Obviously family, but even beyond family, investing in mentors, a peer network, people who you can reach out to and get perspective on, and just consistently building those relationships over time is the way I think of the heart aspect. And again, making sure that you're very clear on what your non-negotiables are. So protecting time with the family. And again, even with all of, like with everything, it's quality, not quantity, right? So again, bringing positive energy to all of your relationships. And then soul is an interesting one. For me, it's a very deep faith practice that I believe in, because I having the benefit of the background that I grew up with. But whether you have a faith practice, whether it's meditation, whether it's service, or whatever connects you to meaning, and making sure that you're doing that consistently. And that also, in some ways, this may be too much technology or speak, but that also relates to kind of the happiness hormones, right? So we get our endorphins from exercise that give us a lot of happiness. We get our serotonin from things that give us meaning, right? So and affection and love. So just a lot of the happiness psychology also fits very nicely around taking care of these mind, body, heart, and soul, and getting all of your endorphins, your dopamine, your chemical kind of natural chemical releases without needing to have any external stimuli.
Well, honestly, and I barely have time for one question left, but we've already gone through all of our time that quick, and I could honestly spend another hour or two talking with you about this. This has been so great. When I when I listened to the last few things that you said, I think it's so important for anybody, especially in leadership, because we have a tendency to feel that success comes from burning the midnight oil, from, reading everything, whatever anybody told you to do, from doing things that always have a business purpose associated with it. And to, sometimes you don't get to the gym, sometimes you don't get to exercise, sometimes you don't get to spend time just looking at your children or getting to be with loved ones or having a dinner with friends. And I'm so glad you brought all that up because, it's been really purposeful for myself. I'm 5 times a week I do yoga, 2 times a week I lift, and I do walk myself too, and because I can walk myself still, so I'm lucky. But with that, there is, I think, an awful lot for leaders to learn on how they have to invest in themselves first to be the best possible person so they can be there for their others. And so, the only thing I have for you, Anupam, would be is there anything that, you wanted to talk about or mention that I may not have reviewed about leadership or anything of that nature? I'm sure you could go into that from your training ability, but, anything else?
Ultimately, leadership is what makes leadership meaningful is the ability to have impact at scale, right? And I'm very grateful to what all of our early childhood leaders do, whether it be a teacher in a classroom or a center director or everybody who serves this space, because what you do is going to help influence the next generation to be better prepared, to be better citizens, to unleash their fullest potential. And that's what I think at the end of the day, what my why is, which is if I can help our teams unleash their fullest potential in service of our mission, just as our educators work tirelessly to help our children unleash their fullest potential, that's what makes it all fun.
That's awesome. Well, I want to thank you again, Anupam, for joining us for this journey and this conversation today. It's been excellent. I've really enjoyed it myself. I've gotten a lot out of it. As I oftentimes say, when I get opportunities to speak to people like yourself, I learn so much. I take away so much from it. And so I am a little selfish there, I have to say, when it comes to it. But with that said, just tell us just a little bit about where Excelligence is going and, a little bit about what your thoughts are of how Excelligence is impacting the industry.
Sure. So Excelligence, again, just for a brief introduction, because many of our educators do not necessarily know the name Excelligence, but they're more familiar in the early childhood space with discount school supply, which is about, again, great value, high quality products that help educators in the early childhood space. Our elementary educators are more familiar with really good stuff, which is, again, teacher inspired, teacher developed products that are great classroom solutions and that also bring a lot of innovation to the classroom. Children's Factory, which is our soft play and furniture, so thinking of inspired spaces for imagination and play. Frog Street, which is the curriculum business that you seem to be quite familiar with as well, which is about building connect. We think about it as building connected communities that enable confidence and kindness. And then EPI, which is more of a school kitting business. And then we sell a ton of product brands, colorations, which is again about arts, having fun with arts and crafts, and really enabling learning through play. And then similarly, Steve Spangler Science, which is about inspiring the next generation of scientists and engineers. So at its core, what we do is we think of how can we empower teachers and enable them with the products that enable them to create that environment, which can be the third teacher in itself, as a very powerful construct to help serve them. We are continually committed to learning from what our educators need. We launch literally hundreds and a couple of thousands of new products every year to be able to meet the evolving needs of our educators, and that's what we are working on right now for the next series of products. But we really value and deeply appreciate what each of our educators do for making the impact, and we think of ourselves as their partners in that journey to help them succeed at what they're trying to do.
Well, and I appreciate you going through that. We have been a business partner for those out there, just full disclosure, with Excelligence, especially discount school supply for close to over 10 years now. and really bringing some solutions to our members because of discount school supply and just wonderful experiences that we've had overall working with your teams. Just great people. I met Laurel at a conference, gosh, a NACCE conference years ago, and her and I are friends as well as, business partners in the sense that we love to work with each other and try to find ways to help each other along. But I'm glad that she got us connected because I think this has just been a wonderful conversation about leadership and some of the opportunities that hopefully people can glean from there.
Yeah,
So go
I'm
ahead.
very grateful for you doing this again at Excelligence. We celebrate our 40th year this year. So we've been
Congratulations.
a long time doing this, but really appreciate what you do and thank you for your partnership. And most importantly, thank you for this opportunity to again connect early childhood leaders with opportunities to learn from others. And I've really enjoyed the discussion as well. So thank you so much for your time and for your incredible questions. I just love how you bring out so many different themes and topics in such an efficient way.
Well, hey, listen, you made it easy. So I appreciate that, Anupam. So this is Tony D'Agostino. I'm the founder and CEO of Inspire Care 360. And for our podcast, ECE CEO Biography, Sage Wisdom for Childcare Leaders. I want to thank all of you for joining Anupam and myself today for our conversation. Hopefully you can join us again in the future. You can find us on any of the popular podcast stations from Apple to Google to Amazon to Spotify and everything in between. But we want to thank you for joining. And if there is any topics or there's leaders that you would love us to talk to, please don't hesitate to recommend them. We'd love to bring them on and bring that to you. So again, thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
You have been listening to ECE Biography, Sage Wisdom for Childcare Leaders. Thank you very much for listening. We're greatly appreciative of your time. We will continue to produce these programs on an ongoing basis, and please hit the download button and subscribe to our podcast so you do not miss an episode. Thank you very much and hope you have a wonderful day.